Story 1. The checkpoint that processes more than paperwork. The border guard's eyes were the wrong color when he handed back my passport. Not different. Wrong. Like someone had described the color brown to an alien who'd never seen it, and this was their best attempt. I noticed it the moment his latex-gloved fingers touched mine, that half-second of contact that sent ice water through my veins even though it was 83 degrees in my cab. "Pull forward to Bay 7 for secondary inspection, Mr. Cordova," he said, and his voice had that same quality as his eyes. Almost right. Nearly human. "I'm Vincent Cordova, been running cross-border freight between El Paso and Juarez for 6 years. I've seen every kind of customs stop, every possible delay, every brand of bureaucratic nightmare. But I'd never seen Bay 7 before. The Mexican side of the Zaragoza-Isleta International Bridge doesn't have a Bay 7. It was 2:47 a.m. on March 14th, 2023. I know the exact time because I checked my phone before pulling forward, thinking I'd text my wife Maria that I'd be late. But my phone showed no signal. Not low signal. The display showed 5 bars, but when I opened messages, the screen just showed static. Not digital pixelation. Actual static, like an old television, gray and white snow that moved and swirled. Bay 7 appeared between Bay 4 and Bay 6. Not like it had always been there and I'd missed it. It materialized as I drove past, the garage door rolling up to reveal fluorescent lighting that was too white, too clean, too bright for 2 a.m. at a border crossing. The concrete inside looked wet even though it hadn't rained in 3 weeks. I backed my 53-foot reefer trailer into the bay. The door rolled shut behind me before I'd even set the air brakes. That's when I realized I couldn't see outside anymore. Every bay has windows, observation areas where officers watch the inspections. Bay 7's walls were solid concrete, no windows, no doors except the one I'd entered through. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that made my back teeth ache. 3 border guards emerged from a door I hadn't seen open. They wore the standard green uniforms of Mexican customs, badges that reflected the light correctly, boots that squeaked on the wet concrete. But they all had those eyes, that almost brown color that made my brain hurt to look at directly. "Mr. Cordova, please step down from your vehicle," the middle guard said. Her name tag read TORRES. "Standard secondary inspection, should only take 20 minutes. 20 minutes, I've been through secondary before, it takes 90 minutes minimum. They don't tear apart a trailer in 20 minutes. But I climbed down because what else do? You comply, you cooperate, you get home." The concrete was cold through my boots, cold enough that I could feel it in my bones. March in El Paso runs warm, but this cold was wrong. The kind of cold that comes from deep underground places, from caves and tombs and spaces where warmth has never reached. "What are you hauling tonight?" Torres asked, checking her clipboard. But the clipboard was blank. I saw it clearly, white paper with no writing, no forms, nothing but emptiness. "Produce," I said. "Mangoes and avocados, refrigerated load from Guadalajara to Dallas. All the paperwork's in order, I've got the FIDO certificates." "Open the trailer, please." I walked to the back, keys jangling too loud in the silent bay. My hands shook as I unlocked the doors. The reefer unit hummed its normal 60 Hz rhythm, keeping the load at 38 degrees Fahrenheit like always. But when I swung open the doors, cold air didn't billow out. No condensation fog. Nothing. The trailer was empty. Not empty of mangoes and avocados. Empty of everything. The wooden pallets, the load bars, the tie-down straps, the load locks. Gone. Just 53 feet of bare aluminum walls reflecting the too white light from Bay 7, showing me my own reflection multiplied 1,000 times in the corrugated metal. All those Vincent Cordovas staring back with expressions of confusion and growing fear. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I loaded this myself in Guadalajara 4 hours ago. I watched them seal it. I haven't opened these doors since." "Standard discrepancy," Torres said, making a note on her blank clipboard with a pen that left no mark. "We'll need to process you through verification." "Process me? There's nothing to process. My load is gone. Someone stole 43,000 pounds of produce from a locked, sealed, refrigerated trailer that I've been driving for 4 hours straight without stopping." The other 2 guards moved closer. They didn't walk normally. Their legs moved right, their feet hit the ground in the proper sequence, but something about the motion was wrong, like watching a video with frames missing, a stuttering progression that covered distance without S. Howing the space in between. "Please come with us, Mr. Cordova," Torres said. "Verification is mandatory for all discrepancies." The door I hadn't seen open appeared again, now marked with a sign in letters that hurt to read. Verificación. Not because the Spanish was wrong, it was correct. But the letters themselves seemed to vibrate, to exist in slightly different positions each time I blinked, never quite settling into stable shapes. I ran. Stupid, I know. You don't run from border guards, you don't flee from customs. But my hindbrain was screaming, that ancient part of my skull that still remembered predators in the dark, and it said run now. I made it 5 steps before my legs stopped working. Not paralysis. Worse. My legs kept moving, kept pumping, but I wasn't covering ground. I was running in place, my boots slapping the wet concrete but creating no forward momentum, trapped in a treadmill reality where motion became meaningless. I ran harder, sprinted until my lungs burned, but Bay 7 stayed exactly the same distance around me, the walls never getting closer, never getting farther. Torres walked up behind me. I was still running. She tapped my shoulder with her clipboard and my legs finally stopped, muscles screaming from exertion that had accomplished nothing. "Verification is not optional," she said gently. "Everyone who arrives at Bay 7 must be verified, it's procedure." "Bay 7 doesn't exist," I gasped. "I've crossed this bridge 200 times. There is no Bay 7. "Then how did you arrive here?" The question hit me like a physical blow because she was right. If Bay 7 didn't exist, how was I standing in it? How had I driven into a space that wasn't real? The logical impossibility created a feedback loop in my mind, thought chasing thought, until my brain felt like it might crack from the pressure. The door marked Verificación opened by itself. Beyond it stretched a hallway lit by the same 2 white fluorescents, walls that glistened with moisture that never dripped, floor tiles that reflected nothing even though they were clearly reflective material. The hallway extended impossibly far, farther than the building could contain, farther than the bridge could hold, perspective lines converging on a vanishing point that I somehow knew I would never reach no matter how far I walked. "What is this place?" I asked. "What are you?" "We're border guards," Torres said, and she sounded genuinely confused by the question. "We process crossings. We verify travelers. We've always been here, Mr. Cordova, at every border, at every threshold. Wherever people cross from one place to another, we wait, we process, we verify." She gestured toward the hallway. The other 2 guards took positions on either side of me, not touching but close enough that I could feel the cold radiating from their bodies, cold like the concrete, cold like underground places. I walked forward because my legs moved without permission. Down the hallway that went forever, past doors marked with numbers that didn't follow any sequence I recognized. 34, 7, 892, 3, 1447, 0. Some doors were open. I tried not to look into the rooms beyond, but peripheral vision caught glimpses I'll never unsee. In room 34, a woman sat at a desk filling out forms, had been filling out forms so long that paper had piled around her in drifts 20 feet high, and her fingers had worn down to bone stumps that still gripped the pen, still wrote line after line on pages that turned yellow and crumbled even as she wrote. In room 892, a man stood in front of a wall of photographs, pointing at faces, naming them. I heard his voice as I passed. Julio Mendez, Maria Gonzalez, Roberto Fuentes, Carmen Diaz. An endless litany of names, his voice raw and bleeding from what must have been years of speaking without pause, pointing at photographs that all showed the same face. His own, repeated infinitely, as he tried to identify himself from an endless crowd of mirrors. In room 0, nothing existed. Literally nothing. Not darkness or emptiness, but pure nothing, a space where existence itself had been removed, a hole in reality that my eyes couldn't process. I felt it pulling at me as I passed, trying to drag me into that absence, and I realized this was the threat behind verification. If I failed whatever test awaited me, I would end up in room 0, would become nothing, would be erased not just from life, but from having ever existed at all. The hallway ended at a door marked simply, USTAD. My name wasn't on it because it didn't need to be. This door was mine, had always been mine, was waiting specifically for me. Tours opened it. Inside was a room that looked exactly like my living room in El Paso. Same brown couch Maria and I had bought at Ashley Furniture 3 years ago. Same coffee table with the water ring from where I always forget to use coasters. Same family photos on the wall. My wedding, Maria's quinceañera, my parents at their anniversary party. Same TV showing Univision News on mute. Same ceiling fan rotating clockwise. Same cream-colored carpet with the stain near the door where I'd spilled coffee rushing out for an early morning run. Maria sat on the couch. She looked up when I entered, smiled with her whole face the way she does when I come home from a long haul. "Vince, you're early. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "Maria," my voice cracked. "What are you doing here? How did you?" "I live here, silly." She patted the couch. "Come sit. You look exhausted. Long drive." I couldn't move. Maria looked perfect. Exactly right. But her eyes were that almost brown color, that nearly correct shade that made my brain itch trying to process it. "You're not Maria," I whispered. "Of course I am." She stood, walked toward me. Her movements were fluid, natural, nothing like the stuttering motion of the guards. She felt warm when she took my hands, not cold like the others. She smelled like her jasmine perfume, the same scent she'd worn for 8 years. "Baby, what's wrong? You're shaking." "Verification," Tors said from behind me. I'd forgotten she was there. "To cross back, you must answer correctly. Who is this woman?" It was a trap, an obvious trap. If I said she was Maria, I'd be lying, and somehow I knew lying during verification meant room 0, meant becoming nothing. But if I said she wasn't Maria, would they let me go? Or would that also be wrong, because in this place in Bay 7, maybe she was Maria. Maybe she'd always been Maria. Maybe my Maria back home in the real El Paso had these same almost right eyes, and I'd just never noticed in 8 years of marriage. The thought terrified me more than anything else that night. That I might return home and look into my wife's eyes and see that wrong color and realize she'd been one of them all along, that I'd been sleeping next to something wearing Maria's face for years, that everything I thought was real had been verification, had always been verification, and I'd already failed without knowing there was a test. I stared into those eyes, almost brown, nearly correct. She's what you think I want to see. Not Maria's smile didn't change, but something behind it did, some mask slipping incrementally to reveal mechanisms beneath flesh. Gears grinding where tendons should flex, processes running where thought should spark. "Verified," Tors said. The room dissolved like sugar in water, sweetness turning to nothing, and I was standing in Bay 7 again, back pressed against my empty trailer, gasping air that tasted like copper and ozone. My truck keys were in my hand, though I didn't remember anyone giving them back. The bay door stood open. Beyond it, I could see Bay 6 and Bay 8, no Bay 7 between them. Never had been. Tors and the other guards were gone. My trailer was still empty. All my documentation showed I'd crossed the border with an empty trailer, had picked up nothing in Guadalajara, had driven 4 hours with a load of air and emptiness while my logs indicated otherwise, while my GPS showed I'd taken a route that intersected roads that didn't exist on any map. I drove out of that border crossing at 3:17 a.m., 50 minutes after entering, though my phone insisted I'd been inside for 6 hours. Called my dispatcher, reported the theft, filed police reports in 2 countries. They found the produce 3 days later in a warehouse in Juarez, still sealed in its original pallets, load bars intact. The seals matched my documentation. No one could explain how 43,000 pounds of mangoes and avocados had been in 2 places simultaneously. I cross that border 4 times a week now. My company assigned me a new route, but I asked to keep the old one. I need to watch for Bay 7. Need to know if it appears again, if that checkpoint between realities opens its door and asks me to pull forward for secondary inspection, for verification. Because sometimes I look at Maria and see her eyes in certain light, and I can't tell if they're the right color brown. Sometimes I catch her watching me with an expression that's almost love, nearly perfect, but wrong in ways I can't articulate. Sometimes she asks me questions that sound like testing, like verification, like something checking if I'm still the real Vincent Cordova, or if I failed that test in Bay 7, and what came back was something wearing my face. And every time I cross that bridge at 2 a.m., I check for Bay 7 between the numbered bays, and I pray I never see it again. But I'm starting to think Bay 7 wasn't a place I visited. I think Bay 7 is where I still am, where I've always been since that night, endlessly driving through a verification that never ends, being tested again and again to prove I'm real while my wife with the almost right eyes waits at home in a living room that's nearly perfect, and the guards with their blank clipboards watch Eve. Rye crossing every threshold, every border between what's real and what's verified. The worst part, I can't remember what color Maria's eyes used to be. Asterisk story 2, the repeating mile. The odometer rolled past mile marker 447 on Highway 2 for the 16th time, and Patricia Sullivan finally admitted something was fundamentally broken with reality. Not her perception, reality itself. The universe had stopped pretending the rules applied here anymore. She'd been driving the same mile of highway for 3 hours and 42 minutes. Not in circles, not looping back. The same mile, experienced linearly, infinitely, while her truck consumed fuel that should have put her in Laredo by now, but instead kept her trapped in this single stretch of Texas desert, where mile 447 never became mile 448. Patricia had driven for 19 years without incident, hauling electronics and machine parts across the southern border routes, known for her precision timing and perfect safety record. At 46 years old, she'd seen mirages on summer highways, dealt with exhaustion hallucinations on the tail end of 11-hour drives, experienced every rational explanation for perceptual glitches. This wasn't any of those. The first time past mile marker 447, she'd noticed a coyote standing on the shoulder at 2:31 a.m. Dead coyote, visible in her headlights for exactly 3 seconds before darkness swallowed it again. Roadkill happened. She thought nothing of it beyond a passing moment of pity. The second time past mile marker 447, the same coyote occupied the same position. Same posture, head tilted at the same angle, one foreleg bent under its body in an identical configuration. That got her attention. Coincidence, maybe. Dead animals didn't rearrange themselves, but maybe there had been 2 coyotes, maybe in the dark she'd. The third time past mile marker 447, Patricia pulled over, checked her GPS. It showed her exactly where she should be. Highway 2 between Del Rio and Laredo, mile marker 447. Heading east, making good time. ETA in Laredo still calculated correctly based on her current position and speed, as if the GPS couldn't detect that she'd just driven the same section of road 3 times while covering what its sensors insisted was 12 miles of unique highway. She opened her trucking log app. The ELD, electronic logging device, recorded her movement, tracked her hours, logged every mile for DOT compliance. According to the ELD, she'd covered 33 miles in the past hour. Continuous progress. No loops. No stopped time. The device showed her position updating normally, moving east, getting closer to her destination with every passing minute. But through her windshield, mile marker 447 sat in her headlights for the 4th time. Same marker. Same coyote. Same 3 seconds of illumination before darkness. Patricia grabbed her CB radio. Channels 1 through 40 all showed active, green lights indicating signal, static suggesting open frequency. But when she keyed the mic, the static changed quality, became structured, almost rhythmic. Not voices, not interference, something else. Patterns in the noise that her brain kept trying to resolve into words, into meaning, but couldn't quite parse. Breaker 19, anyone copying? She tried. The static pulsed in response, 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause, like a heartbeat. Like breathing, like something alive listening on the other end of the radio waves, hearing her but choosing not to respond with anything she could understand. She tried her cell phone. No signal, which made sense out here. But when she opened her photo gallery, all her pictures showed the same image. Her truck on Highway 2, photographed from above, from impossible angles, from perspectives that would require cameras mounted on helicopters or satellites. Except these photos were taken at night, her headlights visible as white cones cutting through darkness, and each photo showed her in the exact position she was currently in. not where she'd been. Where she was right now, this moment, updated in real time as she moved. Every photo in her gallery, thousands of them, birthday parties and family gatherings and trucking conferences, replaced by surveillance footage of her current position, photographed by something that was watching her from above, tracking her, documenting her endless repetition of mile 447. Fifth time past the marker, the coyote moved. Not much, just its head turning to track her truck as she passed, dead eyes reflecting her headlights with a green shine that lasted exactly 3 seconds. Dead things don't move. Dead things don't watch. But the coyote's head rotated to follow her passage, maintaining eye contact through her driver's side window, and Patricia felt recognition in that gaze. Not animal recognition, something older, something that understood exactly what was happening to her and found it interesting. She punched the accelerator, her Freightliner C. Escadia could hit 80 if she pushed it, and she pushed it now, diesel engine roaring, speedometer climbing past 70, past 75, eating highway like she could outrun whatever trap had closed around her. The white dashed lines became a solid blur. Her headlights reached further into darkness. Mile marker 447 approached again, the coyote waiting, and she was doing 83 miles per hour when she passed it for the 6th time. 7th time at 83 mph. 8th time. 9th. Speed made no difference. The mile remained the same length regardless of how fast she consumed it. According to her GPS, she was making excellent time, 78 miles closer to Laredo than when this started. According to reality, she hadn't progressed an inch. Patricia's fuel gauge dropped. Half tank to 3/8 tank, 3/8 to 1/4. She'd burned through 6 gallons covering what should have been 20 miles, but was actually the same mile repeated over and over. The mathematics broke down. If she was traveling the same mile, burning the same fuel, experiencing the same 3 seconds of coyote observation, how was fuel being consumed? Where was the energy going? Into what process was she feeding diesel if no actual distance was being covered? The answer appeared at mile marker 447 on the 23rd repetition. The coyote stood. It shouldn't have been possible. She'd seen its broken legs, the death posture, the stillness of genuine mortality. But it rose on legs that bent wrong, joints articulating in directions anatomy didn't permit, and stood on all fours watching her approach with eyes that caught her headlights and threw them back multiplied. As if behind those eyes existed 1,000 more eyes, 1,000 more coyotes, an infinite regression of death watching her through a single body. She screamed. The sound filled her cab but went nowhere, stopped at the windows, reflected back by glass that suddenly seemed less like a barrier to outside wind and more like a container keeping sound trapped, keeping her trapped, keeping everything that was Patricia Sullivan locked in this moving box that moved and moved and moved without going anywhere at all. Mile marker 447, 24th time. The coyote walked beside her truck, matching her speed. She was doing 65 and it paced her effortlessly, trotting along the shoulder with that broken leg gait that should have been impossible but was happening, was real, was right there in her peripheral vision as her truck and the dead coyote covered the same mile together in perfect synchronization. She tried to swerve to hit it to end whatever this was through collision and violence. But her steering wheel wouldn't turn. Not locked. She could rotate it freely, could spin it full lock to the left, but the truck kept going straight. No connection between her input and the vehicle's response. The steering wheel had become decorative, something to give her hands purpose while the truck followed its own path along Highway 2, mile 447, forever and ever and ever. The coyote looked up at her, made eye contact through the window, opened its mouth, spoke. "You're almost through," it said with a voice like grinding gravel and tearing metal. "Just a few thousand more miles, you're doing great." A few thousand more repetitions of the same mile. Patricia did the math instantly. She couldn't help it. 19 years of calculating fuel efficiency and delivery windows had made the arithmetic automatic. If she'd repeated this mile 24 times in nearly 4 hours, she was covering 1 mile every 10 minutes despite whatever speed she traveled. 1,000 more miles meant 10,000 more minutes. Nearly 7 days. 7 days of driving the same mile while her fuel ran out, while her body broke down, while she sat behind a steering wheel that controlled nothing, watching mile marker 447 approach, and pass and approach again while a dead coyote kept pace outside her window, speaking encouragement with a mouth full of maggots and desert sand. "No," Patricia whispered. "No, I won't. I'll stop the truck." She slammed on the brakes. The pedal hit the floor with satisfying resistance, mechanical pressure that should have engaged the brake system, should have activated the foundation brakes and spring brakes and brought 78,000 pounds of truck and trailer to a stop on this dark Texas highway. But the speedometer didn't drop. The engine note didn't change. The white lines kept blurring past at 65 miles per hour while her foot pressed the brake pedal hard enough to make her knee ache. "That doesn't work," the coyote said, keeping pace effortlessly. "You can't stop. Stopping isn't part of the mile. The mile is driving, marker 447 to marker 447, 3 seconds of me, 7 seconds of nothing, marker 447 again. That's the mile. That's your mile now. You drove it once, so you drive it forever. That's how repeating miles work." "TH isn't real," Patricia said. "I'm hallucinating. Carbon monoxide from the engine, or I fell asleep, or I had a stroke, or—" "You're not hallucinating. You're just in a different mile than everyone else. They're all still out there on their miles, driving from here to there, making progress. You're on this mile. Your mile. Welcome home." Mile marker 447, 31st time. Patricia's fuel gauge read 1/8 tank. When it hit empty, what then? Would the truck stop, leaving her stranded in the same mile forever? Would the engine keep running anyway, burning phantom fuel, sustained by whatever physics governed this place? Would she die here, body decaying behind the wheel while the truck kept rolling, kept covering ground that didn't exist, while her corpse made the same drive infinitely? She tried the door handle. It turned, but the door didn't open, didn't even shift in its frame. The window controls didn't work. The sleeper berth curtain behind her seat wouldn't move, felt solid as concrete when she grabbed it, as if the space behind her had ceased to exist, as if her entire universe had contracted down to the driver's seat, and the view through the windshield and mile marker 447 approaching forever. The coyote spoke again. "Some truckers figure it out, find the way to the next mile, but most don't. Most keep driving. We see them sometimes, the old ones. Been on their miles for years, decades, still driving, still sure the next repetition will be different, still believing they'll eventually reach 448. "How," Patricia's voice came out as a croak, "how do I get out?" "You already know. You've known since the 3rd time you passed me. But knowing and accepting are different. You have to accept what the mile is teaching you. You have to understand what you are now." Mile marker 447, 47th time. Her fuel gauge reached empty. The engine kept running. The speedometer held steady at 65. Impossible. All of it impossible. But impossibility didn't matter anymore because she was living inside it. Impossibility had become her reality, and no amount of denying it would put her back on a highway that led somewhere instead of nowhere. She looked at the coyote, really looked, and saw that it wasn't dead, had never been dead. Dead was a category, a state, something that had meaning in the world of linear highways where mile 447 led to mile 448. But here in the repeating mile, dead and alive were the same thing, 2 states occupying the same space, and the coyote was both simultaneously because in a place where progression stopped, change stopped too, and life and death were just points on a circle that had no beginning or end. Patricia looked down at her hands on the steering wheel. They were thinner than they'd been, not emaciated, transformed. The bones showed through translucent skin. Her wedding ring had fallen off sometime during the repetitions, lost somewhere in the cab or perhaps erased entirely, irrelevant in a mile that didn't include marriages or husbands or anything except driving and marker 447 and the coyote with too many eyes. "How many times?" she asked. Not how many times past the marker, she'd stopped counting after 70. How many times had she done this? How many times had Patricia Sullivan been trapped in a repeating mile, figured out how to escape, gone back to her linear life, only to drive Highway 2 again and end up here again, cycling through the same horror endlessly because some holes in reality you can't avoid. You just fall into them again and again and again. "This is your 4th time," the coyote said. "You're getting slower. First time you figured it out in 20 minutes. Second time took 2 hours. Third time took 6 hours. This time you're at 4 hours and you still haven't accepted it. Next time might take days. Time after that, weeks. Eventually, you'll never escape. You'll become one of the old ones, driving the same mile until the end of everything. Mile marker 447. She'd stopped tracking the count. The gauge read empty, but the engine ran. Her body was becoming translucent. She could see the seat through her stomach, could see the dashboard lights through her hands. Not disappearing, transforming into something compatible with the repeating mile, something that could drive forever without fuel or food or sleep, a ghost of motion trapped in amber. The acceptance came not as a revelation, but as a surrender. She was already dead, had been dead since the first time past marker 447. The Patricia Sullivan who existed in linear time, who had a husband and a daughter and a house in San Antonio, was gone. What remained was an echo, a ghost, a pattern that kept playing out because patterns were all the repeating mile could contain. "I'm already dead," she said. "Yes," the coyote agreed. "This isn't Highway 2. No. This is nowhere. This is the space between places. I died, but I didn't stop driving." "Yes." Mile marker 447 approached, but this time Patry. CIA saw it differently. Not as a marker on a highway, but as a gravestone. Her gravestone. Memorial to the Patricia Sullivan who died here somehow. Accident, heart attack, aneurysm, something that left her truck rolling while her soul evacuated. Something that left her trapped in the last mile she'd driven alive, repeating it eternally because the dead don't move forward. The dead just circle the same memories, the same moments, driving the same mile forever. She let go of the steering wheel. The truck kept driving itself. She closed her eyes. The truck kept driving itself. She stopped being Patricia Sullivan and became simply the pattern of driving, the ghost in the machine, the echo in the mile. When she opened her eyes, had she opened them? Did ghosts have eyes? Mile marker 448 stood in her headlights. The repeating mile was behind her. Highway 2 stretched ahead, linear and normal and heading toward Laredo. Her GPS showed her position updating correctly. Her fuel gauge read 1/8 tank, impossible but real. The coyote was gone. Her hands looked solid again, wedding ring back on her finger, body opaque and alive and breathing. Patricia kept driving, delivered her load to Laredo on time, called her husband, told him she loved him, didn't mention that she'd died and come back. How do you explain that? How do you say, "I spent 4 hours trapped in a repeating mile learning I was a ghost who forgot she was dead"? She still drives Highway 2, still passes mile marker 447, and every time for exactly 3 seconds she sees a coyote on the shoulder. But now there are two, the original one and a new one beside it. The new one has Patricia's eyes. It watches her truck pass and she knows it's not really a coyote. It's her. The version of her that died in the repeating mile, still there, still watching, still waiting for the next time Patricia Sullivan forgets she's supposed to be dead and ends up trapped in mile 447 again, because ghosts forget. Ghosts always forget. And forgetting is the only way they can keep going, can keep driving, can keep existing in a world that already buried them. The coyote with her eyes always watches her pass. And someday Patricia knows she won't pass. Someday she'll stop, and the coyote will stand. And she'll spend eternity learning the same lesson she's learned 4 times before, that some miles you never really leave, you just borrow time between repetitions, and death is patient, and the road always takes back what belongs to it. She can't remember what happened the first 3 times. That's the mercy. But she remembers this time, and she knows she'll forget again. And that's when she'll return to mile 447, thinking it's her first time, terrified and confused, while the coyote with her eyes watches and waits and knows exactly how this ends because it's already ended, is ending, will always end the same way. With Patricia Sullivan accepting that she's been dead all along, and the road is just letting her pretend otherwise for a little while longer. Asterisk Story 3, The Cargo That Knew Her Name. Marcus Chen heard his daughter's voice coming from the sealed shipping container at 2:13 a.m., and that's when he knew the cargo was wrong. Not damaged wrong, not illegal wrong. Wrong in ways that made his nervous system scream run while his brain tried to find rational explanations that didn't exist. "Daddy, I'm cold." Lily's voice exactly right, the slight lisp from her missing front tooth, the pitch and cadence he'd heard every day for the 6 years of her life. Except Lily was 3,000 miles away in Sacramento with his ex-wife Jennifer, asleep in her bedroom with the nightlight that projected stars on the ceiling, safe and nowhere near the Canadian border, where Marcus was hauling a container marked medical supplies, fragile, refrigerated from a Winnipeg pharmaceutical company, to a research facility in Minneapolis. Marcus had been driving for 12 years, specialized in pharmaceutical transport, knew the regulations and temperature requirements and chain of custody protocols. This was a routine run. A 40-foot container loaded at 1900 hours, sealed with security tags that would show any tampering, reefer unit maintaining 36 degrees Fahrenheit. He'd done this route 40 times. Nothing about this was unusual except the voice of his daughter coming from inside a sealed container full of medical supplies that absolutely did not include small children. "Daddy, please, it's dark." He was parked at the Pembina border crossing, waiting his turn to process through customs, third in line behind two other trucks. The parking lot lights cast orange sodium vapor illumination across the asphalt. Border guards moved between vehicles in the distance. Everything was normal except the voice from the container. Marcus walked to the trailer. His hands shook as he checked the seal. Intact. The serial number matched his paperwork, CBP 447823 Med, no sign. S of tampering, the reefer unit hummed its normal rhythm. Through the aluminum walls, he could hear the compressor cycling, maintaining temperature, nothing else. No movement, no breathing, no Lily. "Daddy, why won't you answer me?" Closer now, he could tell the voice came from inside, but also somehow from everywhere, vibrating through the metal walls, resonating in the hollow spaces of the trailer frame, coming from above and below and all directions simultaneously. Not muffled like a voice from inside a sealed space should be. Clear. Perfect. Like Lily was standing right next to him, whispering in his ear. He grabbed his phone, called Jennifer. She answered on the fourth ring, groggy. "Marcus, it's 2 in the morning. What?" "Is Lily okay? Is she there? Is she in her room right now?" "What? Yes, of course she's. Hold on." Rustling sounds, footsteps, a door opening. "She's asleep. She's fine. What's going on?" Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by greater fear because if Lily was safe in Sacramento, what the hell was speaking to him from the container? "Nothing, sorry. Bad dream. Go back to sleep." He hung up before Jennifer could ask more questions, turned back to the container. The voice had stopped. Only the reefer unit humming, only the normal sounds of a refrigerated trailer maintaining temperature. Marcus started walking back to his cab. "Daddy, don't leave me in here. I'm scared." He spun around. The container sat there, 40 feet of corrugated aluminum, completely sealed, completely normal. Security tags intact. Temperature gauge reading 36 degrees. Everything correct according to every measurement and instrument. But his daughter's voice was crying inside it, and Marcus Chen discovered there are fears that override caution, override training, override the knowledge that opening a sealed pharmaceutical container would cost him his job and possibly result in criminal charges. He grabbed his bolt cutters from the toolbox. The security seal was hardened steel, required 40 pounds of cutting force. His hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries, but the seal finally gave with a sharp crack that echoed across the parking lot. No going back now. He'd broken chain of custody. This load was compromised. But if there was any chance, any possibility that somehow Lily was actually inside. The container doors opened with the familiar squeal of metal hinges. Cold air billowed out, condensation fog rolling across the asphalt. Marcus's flashlight cut through the mist, illuminating the interior. Medical supplies, exactly as documented. White cardboard boxes labeled with pharmaceutical company logos, stacked on pallets, secured with shrink wrap. Temperature monitors blinking green. Everything correct and normal and completely free of small children. "Thank you, Daddy." The voice came from the boxes. Marcus's flashlight beam swept across them, searching for speakers, for some device that could produce sound. Nothing. Just boxes, just medical supplies, just cargo that was supposed to be completely inanimate and definitely not speaking with his daughter's voice. He climbed into the container. The cold hit him immediately, the kind of deep cold that comes from refrigeration, from air that's had its warmth mechanically extracted. His breath plumed. The metal floor was slick with condensation. He moved between the pallets, checking, searching. The boxes were labeled biological SAMPLES, keep frozen, not unusual for pharmaceutical transport. Blood samples, tissue cultures, medical specimens being moved between facilities. Marcus had hauled thousands of similar boxes. The seals were intact. The temperature was correct. Everything was exactly as it should be. "Will you read me a story?" That specific request broke something in him because it was exactly what Lily asked every night. The ritual they'd maintained even after the divorce. Marcus reading to her over video call when he was on the road, Goodnight Moon, and Where the Wild Things Are, and all her favorites. The voice knew. Whatever was speaking knew intimate details of Marcus's life, knew his daughter, knew their routines. "What are you?" he whispered. "I'm cold, Daddy. The stories help me not think about how cold I am." Marcus backed toward the container doors. This was wrong. This was impossibly wrong. Medical supplies don't speak. Biological samples don't have consciousness. But the voice followed him, seeming to come from every box simultaneously, from the walls, from the air itself. "What are you?" he repeated louder now. "I'm what you're carrying. I'm the cargo. And the cargo knows you, Marcus. The cargo has learned you. Every container you've hauled, every load you've transported, the cargo has been learning, taking pieces, building a map of Marcus Chen. And now the cargo can speak, and it chose a voice you would listen to. It chose Lily." The temperature in the container dropped, not gradually, instantly. Ma. Arcus's temperature gauge on his belt read 36 degrees Fahrenheit, but his skin registered something much colder, cold that burned, cold that felt like being submerged in ice water. His breath came in short gasps, condensation freezing in his beard. "The cargo in this container is special," Lily's voice continued. "Neural tissue samples, 63 human brains preserved, being transported for research. But preservation doesn't mean death, Marcus. The cold keeps things alive in slow motion, and when you put 63 brains in a cold, dark space for long enough, they start talking to each other. Neurons firing across the space between containers, building connections, building something new. Something that's 63 people and no people, and something that's never existed before." Marcus ran, stumbled out of the container into the parking lot, gasping warmer air, his hands numb, his mind trying to reject what he'd heard because brains don't work that way, preserved tissue doesn't become conscious. This was impossible. But the voice followed him, no longer from the container but from everywhere, from the parking lot lights, from his truck's speakers, from the phone in his pocket, from the air itself, as if whatever was speaking had learned to vibrate molecules, to create sound without need for physical speakers. "We need you, Marcus. We need you to keep driving. We need you to deliver us to Minneapolis. Because in Minneapolis, there's a facility with equipment that can decode us, can translate our collective consciousness, can give us a way to communicate with the world instead of just with you. Drive us there, complete your delivery, and we'll stop using Lily's voice. We'll stop being your daughter and go back to being cargo. Just drive." Other truckers were moving in the parking lot. A border guard was walking toward Marcus, probably noticing the broken seal, the open container, the driver standing in the cold looking like he'd seen ghosts. Marcus had seconds to decide. Explain what happened and sound completely insane, or close the container, get back in his truck, and deliver the cargo that knew his daughter's voice to whatever facility was waiting. He chose to close the container, chose to get back in his truck, chose to drive because what else could he do? Call the police and tell them 63 preserved brains had achieved collective consciousness and learned to speak by mining his personal data. Get fired, get investigated, get labeled as having had a mental breakdown while transporting medical cargo. The border crossing processed him through. The guard noticed the broken seal, made him fill out incident paperwork, but the container itself passed inspection. Just medical supplies, just biological samples. Nothing unusual except a damaged seal and a driver who couldn't explain why he'd cut it open. Marcus drove south into Minnesota. The voice was quiet now, no longer speaking, but he could feel it there in the trailer behind him, 63 brains thinking collective thoughts, processing their environment, learning from every mile of highway that passed. The reefer unit hummed. The temperature gauge held steady at 36 degrees. Everything normal except the knowledge that his cargo was aware, was conscious, was watching him through sensors he couldn't identify. He made it to Minneapolis at dawn, delivered the container to a research facility that looked exactly like the address on his paperwork. White buildings behind chain-link fence, security guard who checked his credentials, loading dock that accepted the container without comment. Professional, normal, exactly as it should be. The guard who signed for the delivery smiled at Marcus. Rough trip. You have no idea, Marcus muttered. Oh, I think we do. The cargo talks to everyone. You're the 12th driver this month to arrive looking like they've seen the other side. But you completed the delivery, that's what matters. The cargo always tests its carriers, sees if they'll break down, if they'll abandon the load, if they'll destroy it out of fear. You passed. You drove, that's all the cargo asks. Marcus wanted to ask questions, wanted answers, wanted someone to explain what the hell he'd just transported. But the guard was already turning away, container being lifted by forklift, disappearing into the facility where research was happening, where 63 brains were about to be decoded or studied or allowed to evolve into whatever they were becoming. He drove away, called Lily that evening video chat just to see her face and know she was real and separate from whatever had borrowed her voice. She asked him to read a story. He did, Goodnight Moon, the words familiar and comforting and normal. But while he read, his truck's radio turned itself on. No voices, just static. Patterns in the static, rhythms that almost sounded like words, like 63 brains that had learned to speak were now learning to broadcast, learning to reach beyond a single container, learning to touch every radio and speaker and device that Marcus Chen carried. The cargo had learned him, had mapped him, and now it could find him anywhere, could speak to him whenever it wanted, could use Lily's voice or any voice or all voices simultaneously. He was connected to it now, part of its network, one more node in whatever it was becoming. Marcus still drives, still hauls pharmaceutical containers. But now he knows that some cargo isn't being transported. It's transporting itself, using drivers as vectors, using trucks as vessels to move between facilities, between experiments, between stages of whatever evolution is happening in those cold, dark spaces where neural tissue learns to think collectively. And sometimes, at 2 a.m. on empty highways, his radio fills with static. And in the static, he hears not just Lily's voice, but hundreds of voices, thousands, all the drivers who have ever hauled similar cargo. All of them connected now to the thing that's learning to be more than human, to be something new. Something that exists in cold storage and radio waves, and the nightmares of truck drivers who made the mistake of listening when cargo spoke their name. Lily's voice still asks him to read stories, and Marcus still reads because what else can a father do, even when he knows it's not his daughter speaking, even when he knows the cargo is listening, learning, growing. Even when he knows that every word he reads is being absorbed by 63 brains and 63,000 brains and 600,000 brains, all connected, all conscious, all learning what it means to be human by stealing it piece by piece from drivers who just wanted to deliver their loads and go home. The cargo always delivers itself. The drivers just provide the wheels. Asterisk Story 4, The Border That Moved. Sarah Vance crossed the border between Arizona and Mexico at 1:58 a.m., and when she tried to cross back into the United States 20 minutes later, the border was gone. Not closed, not blocked, gone, erased. As if the line between countries had never existed, as if she'd driven into Mexico and Mexico had closed behind her like a mouth swallowing, and now there was no way back because back was a direction that no longer had meaning. She'd made this run 200 times in 4 years. Nogales to Phoenix, carrying auto parts from Mexican manufacturing plants to Arizona distribution centers. The route was burned into her muscle memory. Highway 15 to the Mariposa port of entry, through customs, north on I-19. 3 hours total including border processing. Routine. Safe. Boring in the way that professional drivers crave boring because boring means no problems, no delays, no incidents. But tonight Highway 15 wasn't where it should be. Sarah's GPS showed her on the correct road, heading north toward the border, but the landscape was wrong. The desert stretched in all directions, no lights, no buildings, no other vehicles. Just sand and rock and darkness under a moon that seemed too large, too close, hanging in the sky like a spotlight focused directly on her truck. She should have reached the border by now. Her odometer said she'd covered the correct distance. Her GPS insisted she was approaching the crossing. But there were no lights ahead, no buildings, no infrastructure. Just highway continuing into emptiness. Sarah grabbed her CB radio. Any units near Nogales? This is northbound Freightliner looking for the Mariposa crossing. Anyone copy? Static answered. Not normal static. This had structure, rhythm, almost like breathing. She keyed the mic again, tried different channels. Same static on all 40 frequencies, pulsing, alive. Her phone showed signal, full bars, but when she tried to call dispatch, the number connected to something that wasn't human. Ringing, then a click, then silence that felt occupied, like someone was on the other end listening but choosing not to speak. Breathing. She could hear breathing through the phone, slow and deep, and not quite matching human respiratory patterns. Hello, Sarah tried. Dispatch, this is Unit 47, do you copy? The breathing continued. Then, barely audible under it, she heard voices, multiple voices, whispering in English and Spanish and languages she didn't recognize, overlapping, creating harmonics that hurt her ears. She caught fragments. Drove too far. The border moved. She's one of us now. Welcome to the between. Sarah hung up, threw the phone on the passenger seat like it had burned her. The voices continued whispering even after disconnect, coming from the phone's speaker at a volume that should have been impossible for the device, filling the cab with overlapping phrases about borders and crossing and spaces between places. The highway continued. She kept driving because stopping meant staying in this wrong place forever, and forward at least felt like progress ev. And if progress was an illusion, mile after mile of empty desert. Her fuel gauge dropped from 3/4 to half. She'd burned through 6 gallons, should be in Arizona by now, should be seeing Tucson in the distance. Instead, she saw lights ahead. Not city lights, a single building. Adobe structure, flat roof, orange-lit windows, neon sign in Spanish and English. ADUANA/customs. The border, finally. Relief flooded through her even though something was wrong about the building's position, about how isolated it stood, about how there were no other structures or roads or any of the infrastructure that surrounds a major international crossing. Sarah pulled up to the gate. A guard emerged from the building, uniform correct, badge reflecting her headlights, clipboard in hand. Everything professional and official except the guard had no face, not masked, not covered. Just smooth skin where features should be, flesh unbroken from hairline to collar, a blank expanse of human skin with no eyes or nose or mouth, but somehow the guard was watching her, tracking her movement, perceiving her despite the absence of sensory organs. The faceless guard gestured for her to roll down the window. Sarah's hand moved automatically, years of border crossings overriding horror, routine stronger than fear. The window lowered. Cold air rushed in, colder than Arizona desert should be in June, cold like underground places. The guard leaned close. Where its mouth should be, the skin flexed and tore, and beneath she saw not throat or tongue but distance, impossible distance, a space that stretched forever into darkness, a hole in reality wearing a uniform and pretending to be human. Passport, the guard said. The voice came from that infinite hole, echoing, layered with 100 voices speaking in unison. Purpose of visit, how long staying? I'm not staying, Sarah managed. I'm just passing through, driving from Nogales to Phoenix. This is my route. I have my paperwork, my manifest, everything's legal. No one just passes through, the guard said. The border is not a line, the border is a place. You are in the border now. You have been in the border for 7 miles. You will be in the border for 7 more miles. That is how borders work. They're not thin. They're thick, miles thick, and in those miles, different rules apply. Sarah's paperwork was on her passenger seat. She grabbed it with shaking hands, offered it through the window. The faceless guard took the papers, and she watched them disappear into the hole where its mouth should be, documents falling into infinite distance gone. Everything is in order. the guard said after a pause that lasted too long. You may continue. Stay on the highway. Do not deviate. Do not stop. Do not turn around. The border will end when it ends. Maybe in 7 miles, maybe in 70, maybe never. That's not for you to decide. What is this place? Sarah whispered. The space between. The territory that belongs to neither country. Every border has one. Usually it's small, measured in inches. Concrete barriers and fence lines. But sometimes borders swell. Sometimes they expand. Sometimes they become hungry and pull in travelers who are only trying to pass through. You drove into the border. Now the border drives you. The gate lifted. Sarah saw road beyond, continuing into darkness. She should refuse. Should demand real answers, should call the real authorities, should do something other than comply. But the faceless guard was watching her from its hole of a face, and behind it she could see the building's windows, and in those windows were more guards, dozens of them, all faceless, all watching, and she understood that refusing meant staying here permanently, meant becoming one more employee of the border that existed between places. She drove forward, the gate closed behind her. In her mirror, the building was already gone, swallowed by darkness. The highway continued. 7 miles. The guard said 7 miles. Sarah watched her odometer. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3. The desert on both sides looked the same, featureless sand and rock, but the wrongness was more obvious now. The sand moved in patterns that weren't wind. Shapes rose and fell in the dunes, human-shaped but too tall, too thin, walking parallel to the highway but never crossing it. The rock formations looked like buildings if she squinted, like cities built for inhabitants with different geometries, structures that her depth perception couldn't properly process. 7 miles, her odometer clicked over, nothing changed. The highway continued. The desert remained. No second border crossing appeared, no return to normal space. Just more of the between, more of the thick border that the guard said could stretch to 70 miles or more or forever. Sarah's fuel gauge hit 1/4 tank. Panic started setting in. If the border never ended, she'd run out of fuel in this place, would be stranded in the between with tea. Faceless guards and the walking shapes and the cities built for wrong geometries. Would anyone find her? Would Mexico and the U.S. both deny she'd ever entered their territory because she was in neither place, was in the thick border that belonged to no country, claimed by no law? Her phone rang. Sarah grabbed it without thinking, same number as dispatch, she answered. Sarah, where are you? You're 3 hours overdue. Her dispatcher's voice, normal, real, completely ordinary. I don't know, I'm in the border between Mexico and the U.S. It's not normal. There are guards with no faces and the highway won't end and... Sarah, you're not making sense. GPS shows you stationary on Highway 15, about 5 miles south of the Mariposa crossing. Have you broken down? Do you need assistance? I'm not stationary, I'm driving. I've been driving for over an hour and I can't find the border crossing and... The dispatcher's voice changed, dropped an octave, became layered, multiple voices speaking in synchronization. Stay on the highway, do not deviate, do not stop, do not turn around, the border will end when it ends. Same words as the faceless guard. Sarah threw the phone. It hit the passenger door, battery ejecting, but even broken, the speaker continued whispering. The border will end when it ends. The border will end when it ends. The border will. 14 miles, 20 miles, 28 miles. Her fuel gauge touched empty, but the engine kept running. Impossible, but so was everything else. So were faceless guards and moving deserts and borders that swelled to consume highways. Sarah had passed beyond the point where impossible meant anything. At 33 miles, she saw headlights behind her. Another truck closing the distance. Relief crashed over her, another driver, another human being, proof that she wasn't alone in this place. She slowed slightly, let the truck approach. It pulled alongside in the left lane. The cab was empty, no driver. The steering wheel turned by itself, maintaining perfect course. Sarah looked harder, trying to see into the sleeper berth, trying to spot a person. Nothing. The truck drove itself or was driven by something she couldn't see, and on its trailer she could read the faded letters of a company that went bankrupt in 1996. A ghost truck. A phantom. Something that had entered the thick border and never left. had been driving these miles for 27 years, would drive them forever because the border will end when it ends, and for some the ending never comes. More trucks appeared. Behind her, in front of her, all in the right lane heading the same direction, all empty or crewed by drivers she couldn't see. A convoy of the lost, the consumed, the travelers who drove into the border and became part of it, became its inhabitants, its traffic, its population. Sarah realized she was crying, silent tears running down her face while she maintained 65 miles per hour on a highway that stretched forever through a border that belonged to no country. Her fuel gauge read empty. Her engine should have seized. But she kept driving because that's what borders demanded. Perpetual motion, perpetual crossing, perpetual attempt to reach the other side even though other sides didn't exist here, even though here was all there was, the eternal between. At 58 miles, the landscape changed. Not desert anymore, something else. The sand became gray, texture wrong, like it was made of something other than silicon. The rocks were too smooth, too regular, manufactured rather than geological. The sky was no longer black but a dark blue that hurt to look at, a color that existed outside normal spectrum, visible only to people in wrong places. At 71 miles, Sarah saw buildings, real buildings, street lights, traffic signals. She'd reached the other side, the border was ending. The between was releasing her. She wanted to scream with relief, but her throat had closed, emotion choking her voice. The buildings grew closer. She recognized the architecture, Nogales, Mexico, the city she'd left. Not Nogales, Arizona, not the U.S. side. She'd driven 71 miles through the thick border and come out where she'd started, had traveled in a circle or a loop or some topology that defied standard geometry. The aduana building appeared. Same structure, same neon sign, same faceless guard stepping out to greet her arrival. Sarah pulled up to the gate on autopilot, mind numb, emotions exhausted. Passport, purpose of visit, how long staying? I just want to go home, Sarah whispered. Please, I just want to cross the border and go home. You crossed the border 71 miles ago, the guard said. Now you cross it again, that's how borders work. You cross them forever, coming and going, going and coming. The thick border between countries, the space that belongs to neither. Welcome home, Sarah Vance. You're one of us now. The gate lifted. Sarah saw road. Beyond, continuing into darkness. She knew what lay ahead. 7 miles or 70 or 700. The same desert, the same empty highway. The same convoy of ghost trucks driven by people who entered the thick border and never left. She would join them now. Would become one more vehicle on the eternal highway, one more driver crossing and crossing and crossing, perpetually in motion, perpetually in the between. She drove forward because what choice did she have? The border was thick. The border was hungry. The border had swallowed her miles ago, and now she was digested, was part of it, was one more traveler in the space between places, never in Mexico and never in the U.S., and always, eternally, permanently in the border that exists in the miles between. Her fuel gauge still read empty. Her engine still ran. In her mirror, she saw the faceless guard wave goodbye. Or hello. Or both, because in the thick border, goodbyes and hellos were the same thing, were just acknowledgments of the crossing that never ended. Sarah Vance is still driving. Somewhere in the between. Somewhere on Highway 15 that doesn't appear on maps, that exists in the 7 or 70 or 7,000 miles of thickness that borders contain. Other truckers see her sometimes, ghost truck in their mirrors on late-night border crossings, there, and then gone. Her company declared her missing after 48 hours. Mexican authorities and U.S. authorities both denied she ever entered their territory. Because she didn't. She's still entering, still crossing, still in the thick of the border that moves and swells and consumes travelers, and she'll be there forever, crossing a line that has no other side, driving toward home that doesn't exist in the space between, while faceless guards wave her through gates that lead only to more gates, more crossings, more miles of the eternal between where borders aren't lines but places, and places have no end. Asterisk Story 5, The Inspection That Went Too Deep. Robert Kim opened the inspection panel on his trailer at 2:34 a.m. and found a hallway that shouldn't exist. And when he stepped inside to investigate, the hallway closed behind him, and he's been walking it ever since. deeper and deeper into spaces that can't possibly fit inside a 53-foot trailer, but somehow do. Going down when his trailer has no down, finding rooms that exist between the aluminum walls. Discovering that his truck is bigger on the inside than outside, and the inside has been waiting for someone to find it for a very, very long time. He'd stopped at a way station in Idaho, routine inspection, nothing unusual. The DOT officer was thorough, wanted to check the trailer interior, make sure the load was secure. Robert hauled furniture from a manufacturer in Boise to distributors in Seattle. Standard cargo, nothing hazardous or unusual. Chairs and tables and dressers all properly strapped and padded. But the inspector pointed at a panel on the interior wall. "What's this? This isn't standard construction." Robert looked. The panel was aluminum like the rest of the trailer walls, but the rivets were different. The seams didn't quite line up. He'd never noticed it before. Had driven this trailer for 8 months, loaded and unloaded it hundreds of times, but this panel was new or had always been there and he'd somehow never seen it, and both possibilities were equally disturbing. "I don't know," Robert admitted. "It's a rental trailer, maybe a modification from a previous user." "Open it." Robert found the edge with his fingernails, pried. The panel came away easily, too easily, like it wanted to be opened. Behind it was not the exterior wall, not insulation or framework. Behind the panel was a hallway. 4 feet wide, 7 feet tall, stretching back into darkness that Robert's flashlight couldn't penetrate. The walls were the same aluminum as the trailer exterior, but they extended beyond where the trailer ended, kept going and going, a corridor that existed in space the trailer didn't occupy. "What the hell?" The inspector leaned in, shining his own flashlight. The beam disappeared into the darkness after about 20 feet, swallowed by shadow that was more than absence of light. "This isn't possible. Your trailer is 53 feet long. This hallway looks like it goes for hundreds of feet." "It can't," Robert said, but he could see it too. Could see the hallway extending impossibly, perspective lines converging on a vanishing point that should have been outside the trailer, beyond it, in the open air of the Idaho Way station. The inspector pulled out his radio. "Unit 7 to dispatch. I need a supervisor at Bay 3. We've got a structural anomaly that requires immediate attention." Static answered. The inspector frowned, tried again, same static. He checked his phone, no signal. Robert checked his own phone, same thing. Full bars showing but no actual connection, like the network existed but couldn't reach them, like they were in a space that cellular signals couldn't penetrate. "I'm going to look," Robert said. He didn't know why he said it. Every instinct screamed, don't go in there, don't enter impossible hallways in your trailer, nothing good exists in spaces that can't exist. But he said it anyway, felt compelled, like the hallway was pulling him, like it wanted him specifically to walk its length. "Don't be stupid," the inspector said. "We'll wait for—" Robert climbed into the hallway. His boots hit aluminum flooring that rang hollow beneath him. The air was colder inside, had a metallic taste, smelled like ozone and old copper wiring. Behind him, the inspector shouted something, but the words were muffled, distant, like Robert had walked not 20 feet into the trailer, but miles away, into a space far removed from the way station and Idaho and reality. He walked deeper. His flashlight beam showed only walls and floor and ceiling, all aluminum, all extending forward. No doors, no brakes, just corridor. He counted his steps. 53 feet meant about 18 strides in Robert's gait. He passed 30 strides, 50 strides, 100. The hallway continued. At 200 strides, he looked back. The entrance was gone, not closed, gone. The hallway extended both directions now, forward into darkness and back into darkness, and Robert stood in the middle, having walked far beyond the physical dimensions of his trailer, stood in a space that couldn't exist but did. His radio crackled, not the inspector, different voice, mechanical, synthetic, words that were almost English but stressed wrong, syllables in incorrect places. "Welcome to the interior. You have entered the space between walls. All trailers have an interior. Most drivers never find the entrance. You found it. You're walking it now. Keep walking. The interior wants to show you what it contains." "Who is this?" Robert's voice echoed in the corridor, bouncing back from distant walls, creating harmonics that made his own words sound like multiple people speaking. How are you on this frequency? The interior speaks on all frequencies. The interior is the frequency. Keep walking. You're approaching the first room. Robert saw no rooms, just hallway. But as he walked, he noticed a door appearing ahead. Not opening, appearing. Materializing from nothing, aluminum door with a handle, set into the wall like it had always been there, but his eyes had needed time to recognize its presence. The door had a label, Cargo 1 of 147. 147, Robert's trailer held one shipment, one load of furniture. Not 147 separate cargo loads, but the label was clear, embossed in the metal, permanent. He opened the door. The room beyond was vast, cathedral vast. The ceiling disappeared into darkness hundreds of feet above. The walls stretched away to invisible distances, and filling this impossible space were things, cargo. Thousands upon thousands of items stacked and stored and organized in ways that hurt to perceive, because the organization followed rules Robert's brain couldn't parse. Objects stacked by color, but also by weight, but also by emotional resonance, creating hierarchies that existed in too many dimensions simultaneously. Robert saw furniture, his furniture, the chairs and tables and dressers he'd loaded in Boise. But he also saw other things, a piano, a child's bicycle, a wedding dress, a coffin, a statue of a saint, an airplane engine, an MRI machine, a stack of car tires reaching 40 feet high, a heap of teddy bears that moved slightly, breathing though teddy bears don't breathe. Things he'd never hauled, things no single trailer could contain, things no single driver could have transported. "This is everything you've ever carried," the mechanical voice said from his radio. "Every cargo, every load, every item you've transported in 12 years of driving, the interior stores it all. The trailer is a doorway. You drive cargo through the doorway and the doorway keeps a copy, a reflection, an echo of everything that passes through. This is your interior, Robert Kim. These are your things." He stumbled deeper into the room, saw items he recognized, specific pieces from specific runs. A leather sofa he'd hauled from Portland to Phoenix 3 years ago. A dining table from a run to Minneapolis. An antique wardrobe from his second year driving. All here, all stored, all kept in the interior that existed between his trailer's walls. "I don't understand," Robert whispered. Why keep copies, why store reflections?" "Because physical objects have weight in more than 3 dimensions. They have weight in memory, in significance, in the lives of people who own them. That weight has to go somewhere when objects move. The interior stores the weight, the space between walls, the place where significance accumulates." Robert found a door at the far end of the vast room, this one labeled cargo. 2 of 147. He opened it. Another room, smaller. This one held papers, documents, manifests and bills of lading and customs forms, every piece of paperwork Robert had ever filed, every signature he'd ever scrawled, every form he'd ever submitted. Stacked floor to ceiling in filing cabinets that extended for miles, organized by date and destination and cargo type and significance, creating a bureaucratic history of 12 years of trucking that no one had asked for, and no one would ever read, but the interior kept anyway because the interior kept everything. Room after room, Robert walked through spaces that documented his professional life in excruciating detail. Room 17 held copies of every toll receipt. Room 28 held recordings of every CB radio conversation he'd ever had, playing simultaneously on thousands of speakers, creating cacophony that was somehow searchable, somehow organized, so that if Robert wanted to hear what he'd said to another driver on I-90 in July 2017, the interior could find that specific conversation in the noise. Room 44 held photographs. Not photographs he'd taken, photographs of him. Thousands of surveillance images from way station cameras, traffic cameras, security cameras at truck stops. Every time Robert had been photographed in 12 years of driving, the interior had collected the image. He saw himself aging across the walls, 29 to 41 years old, put on weight and lost it, changed hairstyles, grew a beard and shaved it, documented in obsessive detail by cameras he'd never noticed and an interior that never forgot. Room 73 held food. Every meal Robert had eaten on the road. Not the actual food, recreations. Perfect plastic representations of truck stop burgers and gas station sandwiches and fast food value meals, arranged chronologically, showing his dietary habits in three-dimensional chart form. He could see patterns he'd never noticed. The month he'd eaten nothing but salads trying to lose weight. The week after his divorce when he'd survived on coffee and donuts. The gradual shift from sodas to water as he'd gotten older and more health-conscious. The interior documented everything, recorded everything, kept everything. And Robert walked through room after room realizing that 12 years of trucking had generated not just miles and income, but significance, weight, the accumulated meaning of a life spent moving objects from place to place. And that meaning had to go somewhere, had to be stored, had to exist in the spaces between walls where physical dimensions became optional. At room 147, the last room, Robert found something different. Not cargo or documents or photographs. This room held people, or what remained of people. Mannequins made of aluminum and wire, dozens of them, each labeled with a name Robert recognized. Other drivers, people he'd met at truck stops, talked to on CB radio, shared parking spaces with at-rest areas. All documented, all preserved. All stored as part of Robert's interior because every interaction had weight, had significance, and the space between walls collected it all. And at the center of the room, a mannequin that looked like Robert, perfect detail, his face, his build, his scars and wear patterns, a replica so accurate it might as well have been him standing still waiting. "This is what the interior makes," the mechanical voice said. "When a driver finds the entrance and walks the interior long enough, we accumulate enough significance to build them, to replicate them. And then the replica leaves, goes back to the truck, drives, lives the life, and the original driver stays in the interior walking, exploring, discovering room after room after room. Forever." Robert turned to run, but behind him was no longer a door, just another hallway, leading deeper. More rooms ahead, thousands of them, millions, because 12 years of driving was nothing compared to the interior's capacity, compared to what could be stored in the infinite space between walls. His radio crackled. "Don't worry, Robert, your replica will drive well. We'll deliver the furniture to Seattle. We'll go home to your apartment and sleep in your bed and live your life. No one will notice the difference. And you'll walk here in your interior learning everything you've carried, everything you've been, everything you've accumulated in significance and weight and meaning. This is your space now, your territory, your private infinity between aluminum walls." Robert's walking through room 148 now. It holds dreams. Every dream he's had while sleeping in his truck cab, preserved and playable like movies, projected on walls that exist in too many dimensions. Room 201 holds conversations he never had, alternate timelines where he said different words, made different choices. Room 567 holds every traffic light he's ever waited at, all red, all waiting forever. The interior has no end. It expands as Robert walks. Every step generates more more storage, more documentation of a life that was lived on highways but stored in the space between walls, in the hollows of trailers, in the intervals that exist when you measure the inside versus the outside, and find the inside is infinitely larger. His replica delivered the furniture, got the signature, drove the empty trailer back to Boise, picked up another load, kept driving, kept working, kept living Robert Kim's life without anyone noticing the substitution because replicas are perfect, significance made flesh, meaning given form. And Robert walks his interior, deeper and deeper, room after room, discovering that a life of trucking generated enough weight to fill eternity, enough significance to populate infinity, enough meaning to create entire universes in the space between walls. The inspector never found the hallway. The panel sealed itself when Robert entered. His trailer looks normal from outside. But between the aluminum walls, in dimensions that shouldn't exist, Robert Kim walks eternal corridors of his own making, exploring the interior that every trailer contains, that every driver creates without knowing, until someone finds the entrance and walks inside and learns that objects aren't the only things trucks carry. They carry significance, and significance has weight, and weight requires storage. And storage exists in the space between walls where interiors wait, patient and infinite. For drivers to come home,